Recording. All right, so we are winding down and you know what to expect. We have a project. The project, so the last week, so we still have 2 weeks of class. The last week will just be time to work on the project. And next week we'll do some stuff on timers. And I don't know, either a little more view and timers or just timers, what have you. So that's what we're expecting class-wise. The material you're expecting on test 3, which will be in the finals week, is XML. Is coming back, way back from lab 8. And then the view and the timers. So sort of 3 little parts. Not, I'm making no promises about equal weight or anything like that. So it'll be all right. So we're expecting to do a couple more labs. It's probably the end of homework. I'm sick of grading homework. So homework will be done after what I just assigned, some video summaries. Labs are not done because we have to do some timer labs. And the project, the last week, will be time for projects. And then the final. Okay. When was the final? I forgot. You're supposed to remember these things for me.
No, not finals.
Final exam schedule. So what do we are on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3:30. And so we are on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So you're taking the late train, Alex. I'm sorry. All right. So that's what we expect. View XML, go back and remember your XML. Maybe I'll post either make you do a lab or on XML again, or post a practice. View and timers is the material for the test 3, which is at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, May 11th. The week before is time for work on projects. And so let's get to today's stuff. All right. We did view radio buttons. Now we'll do view checkboxes. And then we've also seen inputs and drop-down lists. And so we know we can do most of our interfacing in view now. Okay. So this is almost a repeat of what we did for radio buttons, except that, as we know, the big difference between checkboxes and radio buttons is that the result that you get from checkboxes, if you have an array of them, will be itself an array. You can choose more than one checkbox, as opposed to radio buttons where you can only choose one. All right, so here is the first example, and then I just sort of build up in sophistication, same way we did in radio buttons. I'll build up a little bit faster because it's the same, pretty much the same build up. What did I just do? I unzipped it, I downloaded it, I unzipped it. I'm going to open code. I'm going to open the folder. I'll open up downloads. And there's the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. Okay. The CSS is some body. The input, the checkboxes are inputs. They have associated labels. So this is a styling of the labels. And then we have some styling of if the checkbox is checked and this is the label next to it, then some slightly different styling. So it will be a different styling for the checked checkboxes. For this one, most of the code is in the HTML. And then we'll move increasingly over to the JavaScript. We're using Vue, so we need a link to the CDN. And here was my link to the style. And then we have some region of the page to which we are applying the view. So I need some part of the page indicated in some way. And I've done it here with an ID. And then we'll see at the end of the JavaScript, I'm applying my class to a region of my page, and a pound sign or hashtag means ID. So that means I have something on my page with an ID of view_check, and there it is. I have an input, which is of the type checkbox. I have an ID. I don't really use the ID, but I have it. No, I do use the ID to work in conjunction with the for of the label. And we know that that means that the checkbox and the label work as a team, and you can check either one. So if I open this with a live server, I can click on the label or on the checkbox, either way. So that's what did that. That was the ID of the input and the for of the label. The value, I am checking a bunch of checkboxes, and then I'm going to get an array of user choices. And what I get for a given checkbox is its value. The V model is what I'm getting from interacting with, in terms of view, what I'm getting from interacting with these inputs. And I don't have to do any thing here. I just say V model, I give them all the same name. And view is going to figure out that that means it's an array. So I don't have to say, oh, that's an array. Well, I probably do. I do have to say there's a variable called user choices over in my JavaScript, and I probably do declare it as an array. Yes, there it is. So I over here do declare it as an array. I don't need any indication of the HTML that it is an array. But I am indicating here, then I'm starting off with an empty array. That's all my JavaScript right there. A view class with data, and I'm declaring one variable and making it an empty array to start, and then applying my class to that particular part of the page. So I have a bunch of inputs and labels. So these are all just sort of hard-coded checkbox label combinations. And then down when I'm done with my label checkboxes, I have a region still within the region of the div. That's weird. Do I have two closed divs for no good reason? I think this div on line 50 is the close of nothing. So I have two closes for no good reason. Okay. And how did I know that without too much scanning up and down? Because I formatted the document, right-click format the document, and it gave me some nice indenting. And I had two divs, two closed divs that had the same level of indentings, and that shouldn't be. So that I knew the one was a spare. Okay, but here at the bottom, I have a span. I have a UL, an unordered list, and then I am using a V4. I'm looping over. I have a list item element and I'm using a V4. I'm using view to loop. I'm looping over user choices, which are the values of the check boxes. An item is my dummy index, my dummy variable as I'm iterating through my array. And I'm putting that between my open list item and my closed list item. So I'm displaying the value, which was the name of the movie. Didn't have to be the name of the movie. It could be some code for the movie, or it could have been an index, like an index as 0, 1, 2, 3, but I just made it the name of the movie. So as you're checking movies that you watched, hit your list down here, and I'm not doing any, so I want to say, I'm not checking them and then have a button click event. I can have a button click event. We've seen a button click event. But I'm doing this just on the checking, and actually View's doing it on the checking. All I do is I have up here in my checkboxes, I say I have a V model, and down here in my unordered list, I have the V model is user choices, and then I'm looping over my user choices. So I don't have to think back to the beginning of the course where we would have had to have a checkbox change event, an on change event for all of the checkboxes. And then as they were being checked, add or subtract something from the list. View's taking care of all of that. So why didn't we start there? Why did I make your life so difficult in the beginning? Because I'm like that. And you should appreciate what View does for you. But also know how to do it for yourself. If you went and worked for a company and they said, we don't use View, write it yourself, you should know how to do that. So that was version 1. All right. Version 2. So you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to generate it dynamically, and then I'm going to generate it dynamically using data from a file, because that's what I did for the radio buttons. I'm trying to be a good boy this semester and separate my CSS from my JavaScript from my HTML, but you don't have to. So when you take the test, I will say, I want this, I want you to make something a color. I want this to happen. This needs to happen in the HTML. This needs to happen in JavaScript. This needs to happen in the CSS. That can be 1 file. That can be 3. So now the dynamic, close all these. The style is pretty much the same. Here is now the JavaScript is not too much more to it, but a little bit more to it. Here is my user choices, starting off with a empty array. And then I made my movie choices were an array of objects, and I had my object has 2 properties, the value, which is some kind of code, and the text, which is the name of the movie right now. So that's not TGIF, that's TGFI, The Godfather Part 1. All right. And I just made these up, so that's all right. All right. So, but I could put in here fun things like YouTube codes. You've seen all these fun things that I can do. I tend to keep doing the same fun things over and over again. So, all right. So that is the JavaScript. The only thing that changed in the JavaScript, again, no events really here, just more data. And now what does the HTML look like? Instead of hard coding all of those radio buttons, I'm now going to loop over the data in my movie, not the user choices, but all the possible movies. I'm going to loop over all the possible movies and make checkboxes. So I have a span. Sometimes I loop over down here. I am in the user's movie, I am looping over the array in the list item, in the repeated thing. That's where, so my V4 in the list item is in the thing that's repeated, the list item. But down up here with the checkboxes, I had a checkbox input and a label and a break. And so I had these three things sort of as a team. And I can't, if I did a loop for each one, that would be no good because then I'd have all my inputs and then all my labels and then all my breaks. And that doesn't work. I need an input, a label, a break, an input, a label, a break. And so then I put that a span in. One of the earlier examples, there was a thing called a template. So we need something, if I have one thing, it can be the thing with the V4. If I have a number of things, then I have to put some container around it and have the container be the V4. Okay. So here I did it as a span, but we've seen other things. I could do divs. I could do this thing called a template we saw once, which is more of a sort of a made up thing. Okay, so I'm looping V4, looping over. Movies is an array defined over in view. Movies was in view. A movie is just my default made up name of the iteration variable. I tell you this all the time. It could be a movie because that's what it happens to be in this kind. I could call it item. I could call it element. I could call it poop. All right. I'm making an input of the checkbox type. I'm giving it an ID. When I am coding an attribute, so I'm in a loop. So before I just had the ID and I made it up myself. Now I'm getting my ID from view, from some view data. So then the colon goes in front. And we've also seen, in case you're looking up examples and you don't like mine, that's okay. You might also see the word bind thrown. So this is colon ID equals, and then I'm getting some information from a movie, the text. I need the IDs to be different because ID should be different. And so each movie had a different text. This could have been the text, this could have been the value. Okay, could have introduced some kind of we saw in my example with I think the alphabet, something with the alphabet. Then I can also introduce a counting variable into my loop. And so instead of just having a movie in movies, I could have a movie, comma, I could have a counting variable introduced in my V4. And so this could have been movie and then the counting variable I. It just needs to be something unique. I used the text. The ID, as we just said in the previous example, the ID works in conjunction with the 4 of the label, so they work as a team. So here it's colon 4, over here it was colon ID. We don't have, like in React, in React, this is done in JavaScript, but we're in when we had React and we had Babel, we had this, if the same word was used by HTML and by JavaScript, there were problems and they battled it out. We don't have that same kind of problem in Vue, but there is this indication that you know, the for loop was v4, and this for, because it involved a Vue variable, was colon. So there's still some kind of there's not as much of a issue as there is in React, but there is some issue. Okay. So again, what am I generating? Generating input of the checkbox type. I'm giving it an ID since I'm coding the values. It's colon ID. I'm coding the values. The values are coming from code, so it's colon value. And then the V model is always the same. So the V model is not changing, and I'm calling it user choices. So that's going to associate my other variable over in Vue, the empty array, with the values of the checked checkboxes. I have the label, the for matches the ID of the input, and then between the open label and the closed label, I'm doing the text of the movie. And then down here in the span, I have my ordered list. I have my list item, v4, I'm for looping over that. User choices was my array, originally empty, but as dynamically Vue keeps me up on what the user's doing and adds or subtracts to user list. And then item is my, again, dummy name in my iteration. Could be item, could be element, it could be user choice, a user choice, and it is an object. My user choices are objects, and so there's the item has a text and the item has a value. Do I get to make that up? To a certain extent, but it has to be consistent with what I have here, text and value. Next, version 3, I'm going to go over to a JSON file, and then I don't get to make it up. I have to stick to what's in the JSON file. I happen to have made the JSON file, so I do get to make it up, but you don't get to make it up. You have to respect what's in the JSON file. Did I show you everything? I showed you everything. So here is the JavaScript. Still not much in the way of code here. It's mostly just this data established, and I'm going to have an array of user choices and then an array of movie objects. Okay, version 3 will be a short day, and then I'll answer questions for those who have them. Everything all over again, but get the data from JSON. But if I get the data from JSON, I introduce an event. The reading of the file is an event. And I can only do certain things when I have finished reading the file. And reading is asynchronous. So you've got to be very careful about where you put code that relies on the data. Okay, so I downloaded, I zipped it. It should be now over here. Read the JSON, excuse me. All right. The CSS, the JavaScript, the JSON, and the HTML. The CSS is the same CSS. A little styling for when they click on the checkboxes. The JSON is an object I repeat again, the JSON is, when we read it, is an object. And then that object has a property films. The property films is an array. And then that array has objects, and those objects have properties, text, and value. You always have to look at the JSON. I could have started with the array. I could have started with the square bracket. And it's different the way you interact with the JSON file depending on its structure. Okay. The HTML, I don't think changes much from what it was just a second ago. The link to the CDN, can't forget that. The link to the style sheet. The loop, the introduction of a span, and then the span supports the V4. I'm looping over my movies. I'm making my checkboxes with their associated labels. That hasn't changed from the version I just showed you 2 minutes ago. Here are the users' movies, an unordered list. I'm looping over the list items and showing you the text and the value of the items that the user has selected. I'm linking to check 3, and so here's check 3. Now here's the data. The data portion has become simpler because I'm not writing out all my data in the JavaScript. I'm going to get it from the JavaScript file. So the data has simplified. This is the easy part to mess up. This is an easy part to mess up because you are sort of establishing, initializing, effectively declaring and initializing variables, and but you're doing it within a JSON notation. So it's very easy here to come along and put in an equals, or to have a semicolon instead of a comma. It looks so simple, it's deceptively simple. It's an easy place to make a mistake. So it's a simple thing, and it won't work at all if you make the slightest mistake here. So something to pay attention to. I've made that mistake myself. Okay, we have one of the built-in. Again, we've seen in Vue, you can write your own methods, say for the handling a clicking of a button. And then there's some built-in ones. Created is one of the built-in ones. And this is one of the ones that as the page, as it says, is being created. We had a different one called mounted. I've had better luck using reading files in created. So that's why it's here. We use our favorite old fetch. I have the movies.json is a file that is, if in one file I refer to another file just by its name, that means that they are siblings in my file structure. So there next to my JS is my JSON. I am fetching it. I am doing it in a sequence of thens. Now what this is referred to is called a promise. You are actually going out to read a file. The system knows that that's going to take some time. It's going to try and do other things. And then the then means when you get an answer from going out to get that resource, then do the following. Okay, so if you see an error message that says something about promise, error messages are very difficult to read. You know that. You've been playing this game a while now. Error messages are difficult to come to terms with. Like, what are they trying to tell me? And they're telling you about files that aren't even your files because you're using libraries. But if you see the word promise in there, that's usually for us to fetch. That's the only promising we're doing. This is These are referred to as sort of promises, what you promise to do when you get the response. Okay. A response could go out to the web. We're writing web stuff, and we could be connecting to other web pages. We could be doing APIs. The response is a lot more stuff than just the contents of the JSON file. But our first then says, that's all I want is the JSON file. If you got a JSON file, give me the JSON file contents. I don't want anything more. So then that JSON becomes the data of the second then. I'm using a fat arrow function here. I showed you in one of the examples what happens if you don't use the fat arrow function. If you don't use the fat arrow function, you've got two things claiming the word this. We're writing a class, and class wants to claim the word this, but you're writing a method, a function to handle the then, and it wants to claim this. The nice thing about the fat arrow function is it doesn't claim this. It says to the class, you can have it, I don't want it. And so this refers to movies. But again, I've done it one other way. I've done it a different way once to show you that it exists. And then I usually use the fat arrow. But some of you like to look other places. And so this is something to be aware of, that if you do it a different way, if you're mixing my way and their way, you could have some issues with the word this. Okay, but this, because I use the fat arrow function, this refers to the class. There is a property movies, right there it is. And again, the data, which is the JSON, is an object. It has a property films, and that's the array. So when, oops, I closed there. So I associate movies. I'm equating movies with films because these are both arrays. This is a place where people are going to make a mistake because as much as I beg them to read the JSON file, they don't. And then here's a place where I can do if I want some pre-selected. So I just picked movies 3, which is, I guess, the fourth one because it's probably 0 based, to be, I push that onto my user choices, and that should have the effect of choosing that movie. And in view, let's go and actually run this sucker. Here it is. You see that the 0, 1, 2, 3 movie is pre-selected. When we were in React, if we did something like that, we had to, it had to be in the data, and then we had to also sort of do something, I don't know, sort of eventy, and get the checkbox checked as well. We don't have to do that here. The in view, I've added the, now I didn't do it up here. I didn't have movies and say Raging Bull here. I waited till I had the films and then I pushed it. But pushing it in the data had the same effect as checking the checkbox. So I didn't have to separately say, add it to my array and check the checkbox. That was taken care of for me. The catch, I hope I never see there, but there's a console log to spit something out in case there is some mistake. Misspell the name of the file and you'll get here. And that is that. That's the example. All right. So as you know, I always repeat labs. How many times have you done a tip calculator? And now I think for the third time around, at least the second time around, you will go to Five Guys. because that's my nice example with radio buttons and checkboxes. Come on. So you're going to get the data from reading the file in JSON. So these were not sort of hard coded, they were generated dynamically. A set of radio buttons, another set of radio buttons, a set of checkboxes, another set of checkboxes. Because I don't have just fries, but I have fries and Cajun fries. Did I make it harder? Not for you, I made it easier for you. Because I've shown you how to deal with an array of checkboxes. It usually drives people crazy when I have a single checkbox after I show them how to do an array. They think it's, they try to turn my one checkbox into an array. And well, this time I did it for you. I turned my one fry checkbox into an array of sides. So you can get fries or Cajun fries or both. And I even give you a little code down here for reading my JSON file. I give you a little code down here for summing it up. So hope I've made it easy. I'm trying to like back off a bit as the end of the semester comes and people are getting overwhelmed. All right, so that is that. Any questions for the recording? Not for the recording, not for the recording. She's trying to beat the buzzer. All right, not for the recording. Stop recording.